Imagine the scene. It was March 1943, and Lieutenant James Howard found himself gazing intently from the cockpit of his B-17 bomber, soaring at an altitude of 23,000 feet above the somber landscape of occupied France. His dedicated crew had endured an arduous 8-hour journey, battling frigid temperatures, and skillfully evading persistent German fighters, all to reach a critical ball-bearing factory situated near Paris. With a surge of optimistic declaration, the bombardier confidently announced, "Bombs away!" However, a mere 30 seconds later, Howard, peering through his binoculars, witnessed the dismaying sight of their entire explosive payload, a dozen 500-pound bombs, detonating harmlessly in a sprawling wheat field, a full half-mile short of their intended strategic objective. Their disheartening experience was far from an isolated incident. Of the 228 bombers comprising his formation that fateful day, a strikingly low number, only 19, managed to hit anything even remotely approximating their designated target. This translated to a dismal 8% success rate, yet, in the grim reality of aerial warfare at the time, this outcome was, astonishingly, considered a rather good day. The unpalatable truth regarding American strategic bombing in the early phases of World War II was absolutely brutal, a glaring deficiency that virtually no one in authority wished to address or discuss openly. Back in the hallowed halls of Washington, high-ranking generals were confidently assuring Congress that precision daylight bombing campaigns held the key to ultimate victory in the war. They presented compelling visualizations in the form of charts, showcased elaborate models, and exuded an unwavering conviction in their strategy. Yet, high above the European continent, operational crews were confronting a stark revelation, attempting to accurately drop ordnance from an altitude of 4 miles, while simultaneously hurtling through the sky at 180 miles per hour, under relentless aerial assaults from enemy fighters, and with anti-aircraft fire exploding violently around their aircraft, rendered any semblance of precision accuracy basically impossible. The Army Air Forces had meticulously calculated that they required a circular error probable, CP, of approximately 1,000 feet to effectively neutralize industrial targets. In simpler terms, this projected metric meant that at least half of the bombs released needed to impact within a 1,000-foot radius of the designated aiming point to ensure devastating impact. This sounded perfectly reasonable on paper, did it not? Alas, it was profoundly incorrect. By the summer of 1943, the actual CP achieved during 8th Air Force missions was hovering around a staggering 3,200 feet. For some missions, the operational reality was considerably, even catastrophically worse. During the notorious First Schweinfurt raid in August 1943, American bombers unleashed a torrent of 724 tons of explosives upon ball-bearing factories that were vital arteries, supplying a significant 40% of Germany's overall production. Subsequent aerial surveys conducted post-mission revealed that less than 200 tons actually struck within the confines of the sprawling factory complex. The vast majority of the remaining ordnance indiscriminately pulverized into residential neighborhoods, open fields, and even a historic medieval church located 3 miles distant. A staggering 60 bombers were shot down that day, resulting in 600 men either killed or captured, and, compounding the tragedy, the factories were remarkably swift in their recovery, returning to full production within a mere 6 weeks. Crews, in a cynical but apt description, began to refer to it as the aluminum cloud approach, because, in essence, that was precisely what their bombing strategy amounted to. The fundamental premise of this approach dictated that aircraft would fly in a tight, disciplined formation, with the collective hope that the lead bombardier possessed the requisite skill and knowledge. When this lead bombardier released his bombs, every other aircraft in the formation would immediately toggle their own payloads in a synchronous release. The underlying principle theorized that even if individual bombs scattered widely, the sheer volume of explosives would achieve overwhelming saturation, thereby neutralizing the target. However, German factories typically did not possess an enormous footprint. A characteristic synthetic oil plant, for instance, might cover a modest 40 acres. This sounds substantial until one grapples with the reality that, given a 3,000-foot accuracy, the bomb pattern was spreading across a vastly disproportionate 300 acres. You were, in essence, engaging in indiscriminate carpet bombing and praying that something of strategic importance managed to get hit. The exorbitant human cost of these operations made the situation even more dire. Every single mission meant 10-man crews flying through unyielding barrages of flak. Those lethal black puffs of 88mm shells possessed the destructive capability to shred a bomber's fragile aluminum skin with the ease of tissue paper. Crew survival rates in 1943 were terrifyingly low. Statistically, a bomber crew had only a dismal 1 in 4 chance of surviving their arduous tour of duty, which required the completion of 25 missions. And for what profound purpose? Often, it was merely to watch one's bombs disappear into obscuring clouds, or, even worse, to witness their impact and realize that a residential block had just been obliterated while the crucial factory next door continued its operations unhindered. Morale was consequently collapsing at a precipitous decline, arguably faster than the bombing campaign itself. The Norden bombsight was heralded as the panacea, supposedly poised to revolutionize everything. Should one ever ponder why American bombers stubbornly endured perilous daylight sorties, while their British counterparts pragmatically adopted nocturnal operations, the Norden is undoubtedly the answer. This sophisticated apparatus, officially designated the Mark 15 Norden bombsight, was fundamentally a mechanical analog computer. It weighed a substantial 50 pounds, and commanded a formidable price tag of $8,000 per unit in 1943. That sum, remarkably, exceeded the value of most houses at the time. The Army Air Forces were so profoundly enamored with this device that they allocated a colossal sum of $1.5 billion towards its development and production, making it one of America's most expensive weapons programs. For illustrative comparison, the entire Manhattan Project, a monumental undertaking, cost $2 billion. Carl Norden, a visionary Swiss engineer residing in New York, had designed this optical computing marvel in the 1920s, founded upon a genuinely brilliant and groundbreaking principle. The bombardier would assume a prone position in the nose of the aircraft, peering through the bombsight's intricate optical system, and diligently monitor the target. Simultaneously, the bombsight would seamlessly compute critical factors such as wind drift, altitude, airspeed, and the bomb's trajectory. Here is where the design achieved an ingenious level of sophistication. The bombsight was, in fact, hardwired directly into the aircraft's autopilot system. During the critical phase of the bombing run, the bombardier possessed the capability to make minute adjustments using a dedicated control panel, and the bombsight would then autonomously guide the airplane, physically maneuvering it to compensate for any wind drift. In theory, this integration promised unparalleled precision, often referred to as pickle barrel accuracy. Army demonstrations proudly showcased bombardiers dropping practice bombs with remarkable precision, landing them within 100-foot circles from an altitude of 20,000 feet. Promotional materials for the device literally made exaggerated assertions, claiming that one could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from a distance of 4 miles up, implying pinpoint precision. The security measures surrounding Norden bombsights were characterized by an unprecedented level of secrecy, bordering on paranoia. Bombardiers were required to take a formal oath, entirely separate from their standard military oath, pledging never to reveal any information whatsoever about the device. Prior to every mission, an armed guard would meticulously transport the bombsight to the aircraft in a securely locked case. In the dire event of a bomber going down, the bombardier's explicit and critical directive was to destroy the bombsight using a thermite grenade before attempting to bail out. Tragically, several bombardiers made the ultimate sacrifice, perishing while attempting to adhere to these orders, remaining with their burning aircraft for too long in a desperate effort to melt their Norden bombsights. The military genuinely harbored a profound conviction that if the Germans managed to capture even one such device, they would swiftly replicate it, and America's perceived strategic advantage would consequently evaporate overnight. Here lay the bitter paradox. The Germans already possessed the Norden secrets and, remarkably, did not care in the slightest. A German spy named Hermann Lang had successfully stolen the blueprints in 1938, and when German engineers reviewed them, they merely shrugged with a dismissive reaction, opting instead to return to the development of their own Lotferrohr 7 bombsight design, which they considered superior. Why such indifference? Because they had already discerned what American crews were about to learn the hard way. The Norden's heralded precision was entirely theoretical. Its operation fundamentally assumed idealized circumstances, unlimited time over the target, an absence of defensive fire, perfect visibility, and completely stable air conditions. Combat operations over Europe, however, offered precisely none of these unrealistic prerequisites. The immediate impediment, the first reality check, originated from the targets themselves. German factory complexes were not vulnerable prey situated in open fields. They were equipped with sophisticated countermeasures, including smoke generators capable of blanketing entire industrial zones within a mere 5 minutes of an alarm being sounded. By late 1943, German defensive doctrine had established a protocol requiring every major target to possess enough smoke capacity to ensure extensive obscuration of visibility for a full 30 minutes. Bombardiers would meticulously spend the entire approach painstakingly surveying their target with perfect clarity. Then, at the crucial juncture, the target would vanish under an impenetrable haze of artificial fog. At that point, any bombing became sheer conjecture, and the Norden bombsight, with its inherent limitations, simply could not compute a best guess solution. Then there was the unrelenting hostility of combat itself. The Norden required a straight, level bombing run of at least 3 minutes to calculate properly. Enduring 3 minutes of flying straight and level over Germany meant 3 minutes of presenting oneself as a predictable target for every single flak gun below. Pilots quickly learned that evasive action, while vital for survival, would render the Norden instrument ineffectual. The device simply could not compensate for sudden altitude changes or sharp turns. Consequently, crews were confronted with an untenable dilemma: fly steady and face almost certain death, or maneuver aggressively and inevitably miss the target. German flak gunners were not merely firing at American bombers, they were conducting an industrial-scale execution. By 1943, Germany had constructed the most sophisticated anti-aircraft defense network in human history, and it was absolutely decimating the 8th Air Force. The linchpin of this formidable system was the 88mm flak gun, correctly identified as the Flak 18/36/37, depending on its specific variant. While it gained a versatile reputation as a formidable anti-tank weapon, its predominant role and primary job was the systematic destruction of aerial adversaries, specifically bombers. Germany produced a prodigious quantity of roughly 21,000 of these guns during the war, and approximately 10,000 were densely concentrated, ringing strategic targets across occupied Europe. Here was the inherent lethality that made the 88mm so terrifying. It possessed the capability to fire a 20-pound high-explosive shell up to a staggering altitude of 32,000 feet, all at a furious rate of 15 to 20 rounds per minute. Each shell was meticulously fitted with a time-delay fuse that German crews would manually calibrate based on the bomber's detected altitude. The shell would then climb, reach the predetermined height, and detonate into thousands of razor-sharp fragments traveling at supersonic speeds. A single fragment, no larger than a human thumb, possessed the destructive power to punch clean through aluminum skin, sever vital control cables, rupture volatile fuel tanks, or cause the instantaneous incapacitation or death of a crew member. German gunners were not employing their weapons one at a time. Instead, they were firing in orchestrated barrages, organized into batteries. A typical German industrial target, such as the sprawling Ruhr Valley, would feature 40 to 60 heavy flak guns strategically positioned in overlapping fields of fire, creating an almost impenetrable curtain of steel. Sophisticated fire control radar, notably the Würzburg system, possessed the ability to precision track bomber formations from a considerable distance of 40 miles out, relaying real-time intelligence and continuous data to advanced gun calculators. The Germans literally employed analog computational devices at each battery that would crunch altitude, speed, and heading data, then rapidly derive and spit out precise firing solutions. This advanced capability meant that crews could set their fuses and commence firing before American bombers even visually acquired their target. German anti-aircraft batteries, formidable in their defensive capabilities, would unleash their destructive power and commence firing even before American bomber formations could visually acquire their designated targets. During a significant aerial assault, hundreds of these heavy-caliber guns would simultaneously project thousands of explosive shells skyward, creating what the beleaguered bomber crews vividly termed black fields. These were vast, menacing expanses of atmosphere that became utterly obscured by the pervasive black clouds of detonating ordnance. The grim reality of aerial combat presented a stark and unforgiving calculus. Should an aircraft traverse through intense anti-aircraft fire at an altitude of 18,000 feet, it found itself directly within the optimal lethal zone, where the German artillery achieved its peak accuracy. At such a perilous elevation, aircrews frequently recounted instances where the density of flak bursts was so profound that forward visibility was entirely obliterated. The cacophony within the aircraft during these bombardments was akin to being confined inside a metallic drum, while an unseen force relentlessly hammered upon its surfaces. Survivors, deeply scarred by the experience, described the incessant din as a continuous, rolling thunder, punctuated by the sharp, metallic ping of shrapnel violently impacting the aircraft's fuselage. A profoundly personal testament to this brutality emerged from navigator John Morris of the 301st Bomb Group. Following a harrowing mission targeting Bremen, he meticulously recorded in his diary, "Counted 127 holes in our ship. Don't know how we made it. Jenkins bled out in the waist before we crossed the channel. He was 19. This poignant entry underscored the immense human cost and the youthfulness of those sacrificed. In response to these devastating encounters, American strategic planners implemented what appeared to be a rational and logical tactical adjustment to ascend to greater operational altitudes. By the middle of 1943, bomber formations were routinely conducting their missions at elevations ranging from 25,000 to 27,000 feet, with occasional forays pushing the operational ceiling to an astounding 30,000 feet. At these lofty heights, it was believed that the aircraft would largely escape the effective range of most anti-aircraft fire, and German fighter aircraft would concurrently struggle with diminished performance capabilities in the extreme thinness of the upper atmosphere. However, this strategic climb presented its own formidable set of challenges. At 25,000 feet, the ambient air temperature plummeted to a frigid -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air density was so sparse that even with advanced supercharged engines, aircraft performance inevitably suffered. For mere survival, crews were critically dependent on specialized heated flight suits and constant oxygen supply via masks. Yet, the most insidious consequence of this elevated flight profile was the severe degradation it imposed upon bombing accuracy. The much-vaunted Norden bombsight, once heralded for its promise of pickle-barrel precision, even at 25,000 feet, found its capabilities severely compromised. Every single variable that had rendered precision bombing challenging at 18,000 feet became exponentially more problematic and unpredictable at the higher altitudes. Indeed, the difficulties compounded significantly. Wind velocities at these extreme altitudes were not the comparatively mild 20 or 30 miles per hour encountered at lower flight levels. Instead, they routinely surged to 80, 100, and occasionally even 120 miles per hour. The very existence of jet streams, powerful high-altitude air currents, remained largely undiscovered and misunderstood at the time. Crews could only observe with frustration as their released bombs, buffeted by unseen forces, would sometimes drift laterally for miles before impact. Furthermore, visual reliability became acutely compromised. Clouds that appeared deceptively translucent from above could, upon closer inspection, completely envelop and obscure ground targets. Atmospheric phenomena, such as temperature inversions, created distinct layers in the air that refracted and bent light, rendering accurate optical sighting and target acquisition nearly impossible for bombardiers. The revolutionary offset bombing technique was not the product of deliberate strategic planning or careful design. Rather, it emerged organically from a crucible of desperation, operational confusion, and a singular, fortuitous navigational error during the ill-fated mission over Schweinfurt in October 1943. The second major assault on Schweinfurt's vital ball-bearing manufacturing facilities had already devolved into an unmitigated catastrophe. Out of 291 bombers dispatched, a staggering 60 aircraft were shot down, and an additional 17 sustained such irreparable damage that they were permanently grounded. This amounted to a calamitous 26% loss rate in the course of a single, brutal mission. Yet, concealed within the voluminous post-mission reports was an anomaly, an unusual and intriguing detail. One particular formation, the 305th Bomb Group, had inadvertently approached their initial point, the critical juncture from which the final bombing run commences, from an entirely incorrect vector. Instead of executing the pre-planned north-to-south attack profile, they had entered the target area from the northeast, at an approximate 40-degree angle relative to the primary objective. Their navigator, Captain Robert Williams, had committed an error in calculating the necessary wind correction during the intricate approach phase. By the time the lead pilot became aware of their significant deviation from the intended course, the formation was already irrevocably committed to the trajectory. Maneuvering a tight formation of 18 heavy bombers with precision and speed was an impossibility, especially under the relentless onslaught of swarming German fighter aircraft. Faced with this critical predicament, Captain Williams made an immediate, on-the-spot tactical decision. He instructed his bombardier, Lieutenant Charles Murphy, to utilize the crosswind correction knobs on the Norden sight, but with a crucial modification: to deliberately offset the aiming point to the right of the actual factory complex. Essentially, instead of directly targeting the facility and allowing the bombsight to mechanically account for drift, Lieutenant Murphy was to aim at an empty expanse adjacent to the target, trusting that the powerful crosswinds would then carry the bombs precisely into the intended area. The remarkable efficacy of this improvised method was subsequently documented by the strike cameras, which every bomber carried for post-mission analysis. While most other bomb groups on that fateful day achieved their typical, modest hit rate of 8 to 12%, the 305th's ordnance, astonishingly, walked directly through the very center of the factory complex. An exceptional 42% of their released bombs struck within the designated target area. Initially, intelligence analysts dismissed this outcome as mere happenstance or random good fortune. However, Captain Williams adamantly maintained that it was no accident whatsoever, and he possessed the mathematical calculations to substantiate his claim. The fundamental issue, as Captain Williams elucidated, lay in a critical design assumption inherent to the Norden bombsight, an assumption that was severely compromising bombing accuracy at high altitudes. The sight was predicated on the premise that the aircraft would be flying directly toward its target, with any wind acting either as a headwind, pushing against the aircraft, or a tailwind, propelling it forward. The bombsight's internal drift correction mechanisms were meticulously calibrated for these longitudinal wind components. However, at 25,000 feet over the German Reich, winds were almost never perfectly aligned with the bomber's flight path. Instead, they predominantly emanated from the side, exerting a powerful lateral force that pushed the entire aircraft sideways through the air. This lateral displacement effect generated what aviators termed a crab angle. To maintain a straight ground track, that is, to fly directly over the intended path despite the side wind, the aircraft's nose had to be pointed slightly into the wind, much like a person walking forward while leaning into a strong crosswind. The inherent problem was that when bombs were released from an aircraft flying in a crab angle, they retained both the aircraft's forward velocity and its considerable sideways drift. While the Norden bombsight could impeccably calculate the bomb's forward trajectory, its compensation for side drift erroneously assumed that the aircraft was maintaining a heading precisely aligned with the target. When the aircraft was not, when it was actively crabbing into a crosswind, the bombsight's intricate calculations were rendered inaccurate by hundreds of feet. The stronger the prevailing crosswind, the more pronounced and detrimental this error became. And at the challenging altitudes of 25,000 feet, strong crosswinds were an almost constant meteorological reality. Captain Williams' accidental discovery was deceptively simple in its execution, but profoundly revolutionary in its implications. He realized that by deliberately approaching the target at an angle to the anticipated wind direction, and by intentionally offsetting the aim point perpendicular to the aircraft's flight path, the prevailing crosswind could be harnessed to precisely guide the bombs onto the target. Instead of expending energy and effort in futilely battling against the wind's disruptive drift, the technique effectively weaponized it. In practice, the bombardier would first identify a recognizable reference point on the ground, perhaps a distinctive road intersection, a bend in a river, or a prominent building that was situated directly crosswind from the actual primary target. He would then meticulously aim the Norden sight at this chosen reference point, and as the bombs embarked on their 4-mile descent through the atmosphere, the relentless crosswind would predictably propel them sideways, ensuring their eventual impact upon the true objective. The brilliance of this method resided in its elegant geometry. When executed at a calculated offset angle, typically between 40 to 50 degrees, the wind itself assumed the primary role in the precise placement of the ordnance. The bombs would drift with remarkable predictability, and because this lateral drift was meticulously accounted for from the very outset of the bombing run, the resulting dispersion pattern of the bombs tightened dramatically. Consequently, instead of bombs scattering indiscriminately in an elongated, imprecise oval shape along the aircraft's flight path, they would now track sideways in a highly concentrated and effective linear pattern. It was a profoundly counterintuitive approach. Bombardiers were deliberately aiming away from their desired impact point. Yet, the underlying physics were irrefutable and undeniably effective. The mathematical principles underpinning offset bombing were not inherently complex, but they demanded a complete paradigm shift in how bombardiers conceptualized and approached their task. Traditional bombing doctrine rigidly prescribed: aim directly at the target and allow the Norden bombsight to compute all other variables. Offset bombing, in stark contrast, mandated a different mental framework. For a moment, disregard the target's exact location. Instead, focus entirely on the wind triangle. Every bombardier had been introduced to the concept of wind triangles during their initial navigation training, but for most, these remained largely theoretical academic exercises. Now, however, these very same triangles represented the critical distinction between successfully neutralizing a vital enemy factory and inadvertently obliterating a civilian hospital situated merely 3 blocks away. To illustrate the practical application of this mathematical ingenuity, consider a scenario: an aircraft flying at 25,000 feet with a ground speed of 180 miles per hour, encountering a brisk 90 miles per hour crosswind blowing from west to east. The bombs, once released, would require approximately 60 seconds to descend from their release altitude to impact. This translates into a full minute of exposure to the crosswind's influence. During that minute, the aircraft's forward momentum carries the bombs roughly 3 miles along the flight path. Concurrently, however, the 90 miles per hour crosswind is also pushing them sideways, resulting in a significant 1.5 miles of lateral drift. Without the application of offset correction, a bombardier aiming directly at the factory would see his bombs land 1.5 miles to the east, potentially impacting whatever unfortunate structures lay in that direction. The offset solution ingeniously reversed this problematic equation. Rather than pursuing a direct flight path toward the factory, the aircraft would instead approach at a precisely calculated 40 to 50 degree angle from the west, positioning the crosswind on its left side, thus allowing it to gently push the bombs toward the target. The bombardier's task would then involve identifying a specific offset aiming point, for instance, a prominent railroad yard, that was situated precisely where the wind would carry the bombs from. He would meticulously track this railroad yard through the Norden sight, accurately input the crosswind drift angle into the computer, and execute the bomb release. As the bombs departed the aircraft and commenced their descent, the crosswind would then predictably propel them from the railroad yard's position directly toward the factory. If the calculations were executed with precision, the bombs would arrive at the factory's location precisely as they impacted the ground. The accurate measurement of wind speed became an absolutely paramount factor for the successful implementation of this technique, and it was in this area that ingenious solutions were devised. Navigators began employing a sophisticated technique known as the double drift method during the critical bomb run approach. This involved taking 2 distinct drift readings at different points along the trajectory toward the target. Essentially, they were measuring precisely how much the prevailing wind was pushing the aircraft off its intended course. By carefully comparing these 2 readings, navigators could calculate the actual wind speed and direction with remarkable precision. Highly skilled navigators were capable of obtaining wind data accurate to within 5 miles per hour of the actual atmospheric conditions, a level of precision that proved entirely sufficient to ensure the efficacy of offset bombing. The resultant enhancement in bombing accuracy was truly astounding. Extensive testing conducted by the 8th Air Force in late 1943 unequivocally demonstrated that offset approaches, particularly those executed at 45-degree angles, drastically reduced the circular error probable (CP), a statistical measure of bombing accuracy, from a distressing 3,200 feet down to an impressive approximate 1,100 feet. This remarkable improvement brought the precision almost exactly to the 1,000-foot threshold that strategic planners had originally stipulated for effective bombing operations. The newly refined bombing techniques enabled aircrews to surpass the challenging 1,000-foot accuracy threshold that strategic planners had initially stipulated. Indeed, some exceptionally proficient bombardier navigator teams were consistently demonstrating an impressive 800-foot accuracy, particularly under clear atmospheric conditions. While this figure might not appear particularly remarkable when juxtaposed with the pinpoint precision of contemporary GPS-guided munitions, which can land within a mere 15 feet of their intended mark, in the context of 1943 warfare, it represented a truly groundbreaking advancement. This enhanced precision held profound implications, signifying that aerial ordnance was now effectively striking within the designated confines of vital factory complexes, rather than merely dispersing harmlessly across the adjacent terrain or impacting civilian areas. This sophisticated bombing technique necessitated an exacting synchronization among three pivotal crew members: the navigator, the bombardier, and the pilot. The navigator bore the critical responsibility of perfectly executing the intricate wind vector computations and precisely identifying the appropriate offset point. Simultaneously, the bombardier was required to place absolute faith in these complex calculations, diligently tracking a designated reference point even as his innate targeting reflexes vehemently protested against what appeared to be a deviation from the actual objective. Furthermore, the pilot faced the formidable challenge of adhering rigorously to a precise flight path and elevation, all while anti-aircraft fire erupted violently in close proximity, and his every instinct urged him towards immediate evasive maneuvers. A singular misstep or error within this delicate operational chain would inevitably revert the entire mission to unpredictable and ineffective ordnance delivery. Consequently, the specialized training regimen rapidly emerged as the primary impediment to widespread adoption. Bombardiers, who had dedicated countless months to meticulously honing their skills and aiming directly at specific targets, now faced the arduous task of eradicating deeply ingrained procedural habits. This cognitive challenge was akin to asking an accomplished athlete to fundamentally alter their core motor skills, such as instructing a basketball player to direct their gaze towards the backboard rather than the hoop itself. The brain's established pathways resisted, creating a persistent internal struggle with every step of the re-education process. To address this critical training deficit, the Army Air Forces swiftly established dedicated training academies in geographically diverse locations such as Florida and Arizona, where aircrews could meticulously practice offset bombing runs over meticulously constructed simulated German industrial complexes. Participants engaged in numerous repetitions of these intricate flight patterns, until the complex spatial relationships involved in offset targeting transformed into second nature. The gravity of this strategic shift was further underscored by the decision to recall veteran crews, many of whom had already completed demanding combat missions, back to England specifically for this intensive retraining, thereby illustrating the paramount importance senior leadership ascribed to this tactical evolution. As January 1944 dawned, the 8th Air Force found itself confronting an enviable, albeit formidable, logistical challenge, one that most organizations would eagerly embrace despite its inherent complexities. Having successfully validated a genuinely effective methodology, the pressing imperative now was to disseminate and integrate this groundbreaking technique throughout a vast operational force comprising approximately 12,000 men, dispersed across some 40 airfields strategically located throughout England, all amidst the ongoing exigencies of active military operations. General James Doolittle, who had assumed leadership of the 8th Air Force in January of that pivotal year, meticulously reviewed the compelling efficacy data pertaining to offset bombing and immediately elevated it to the paramount position within his training agenda. He then issued a direct directive to his operations officer, Brigadier General Fred Anderson, assigning him the monumental task of completely retraining every bombardier and navigator within the entire theater of operations, and allowing a mere 6 weeks for its completion. While Anderson's initial response to this daunting demand was apocryphally colorful and unrepeatable, he nevertheless accomplished the formidable task set before him. The comprehensive retraining program logically commenced with the highly critical lead crews, comprising the most seasoned and proficient bombardiers and navigators, who consistently occupied the vanguard positions within each aerial formation. Given that these individuals served as the operational vanguard for their respective formations, setting the example and guiding subsequent aircraft, it was imperative that they fully assimilated and flawlessly executed the intricate offset techniques before the wider force. Dedicated instructional facilities were subsequently implemented directly at every operational bomber base, employing a synergistic blend of didactic classroom instruction and rigorous practical flight exercises conducted over the expansive English coastal ranges. The intensive theoretical sessions comprehensively addressed critical subjects such as wind triangles, precise drift calculations, and the nuanced principles of offset geometry, continuing until aircrews could perform the complex calculations with instinctive proficiency, almost as if operating on muscle memory. Following the theoretical grounding, the practical flying phase commenced. The primary challenge resided in the fact that England during the winter months presented an exceptionally adverse training environment. Pervasive cloud cover was a constant feature, winds proved capriciously unpredictable, and daylight hours were scant. However, this seemingly detrimental situation actually proved advantageous in an unforeseen, yet beneficial, manner. The reasoning was that if aircrews could consistently achieve accurate strikes through the notoriously difficult English weather, then the conditions over Germany would be comparatively less formidable. Consequently, crews would depart at first light, navigate to designated bombing ranges situated off the coast, and execute numerous offset practice runs against maritime targets or decommissioned vessels. Each crew was mandated to complete a minimum of 3 practice missions before being deemed proficient and authorized for operational offset bombing, though some individuals required up to 10 such flights before they developed the requisite intuitive understanding for the technique. A crucial factor contributing to the program's efficacy was that the instructional cadre consisted entirely of seasoned combat veterans mentoring their peers. This was not merely a detached academician merely elucidating abstract principles with a pointer. Rather, it was Lieutenant Murphy from the 305th Bomb Group, the very individual who had serendipitously pioneered the offset technique at Schweinfurt, standing within a freezing Quonset hut, personally demonstrating his exact methodology to other bombardiers. Similarly, Captain Williams led the navigator portions, personally guiding men through his advanced wind calculation methods, utilizing actual mission data for practical context. Whenever students grappled with the inherently paradoxical aspect of aiming away from their intended targets, instructors would present unassailable visual evidence captured by strike cameras from recent missions, starkly contrasting traditional bombing achieving 9% accuracy with offset achieving 38%. The evidence was irrefutable and compelling. The compelling evidence of improved accuracy rendered any descent undeniably persuasive, prompting fundamental shifts in operational doctrine that were enacted concurrently with the intensive training initiatives. Consequently, the 8th Air Force undertook a comprehensive revision of their official tactical bombing manuals in February 1944, formally integrating the new offset methodology into standard procedures. Specifically, Field Order 259, promulgated on February 20th, formally sanctioned the utilization of offset bombing approaches for any operational sortie where sustained crosswind velocities surpass 40 miles per hour, thereby institutionalizing the technique. Concurrently, all group commanders were furnished with comprehensive operational briefing dossiers that meticulously outlined the most effective ingress vectors and optimal approach angles for every significant strategic objective situated within Germany. For instance, the critical industrial facilities at Schweinfurt had specifically advised trajectories from the northeast at 45 degrees, while the sprawling complexes of the Ruhr Valley yielded superior results when employing 50-degree offsets from the west. This meticulous pre-mission analysis clearly underscored an exhaustive preparatory effort, indicating that considerable strategic homework had been diligently completed. Predictably, the full-scale implementation of these new directives encountered initial resistance and friction. Particularly, older pilots, especially those who had endured the brutal combat conditions of 1943, proved reluctant to alter established tactical protocols that had been painstakingly acquired through harrowing experiences and significant personal sacrifice. A notable anecdote from March 1944 illustrates this tension. A pilot from the 91st Bomb Group adamantly declined to execute the prescribed offset approach to Brunswick, dogmatically adhering to the conventional straight-and-attack methodology, simply because, in his words, "That's how we've always done it." His bombardier subsequently missed the intended target by a substantial half a mile, and that pilot was swiftly and discreetly transitioned to roles outside of direct combat operations. General Doolittle remained uncompromising in his resolve regarding this imperative tactical shift. His unequivocal dictum was, "Adapt or get out of the way." Consequently, by April 1944, offset bombing had been fully integrated and accepted as the immutable standard operating procedure across the 8th Air Force. This systemic change was reflected in mission briefings, which now consistently included specialized meteorological analysis segments, where expert meteorologists would furnish aircrews with precise data on anticipated wind velocities and vectors at the predetermined bombing altitude. To further streamline operations, navigators were now routinely provided with precomputed offset approach headings, meticulously derived from projected atmospheric conditions. Should environmental variables shift during the flight, navigators were equipped with readily accessible lookup tables, enabling them to rapidly reevaluate parameters mid-flight and adjust accordingly. This entire system was becoming thoroughly institutionalized and streamlined, a development that crucially meant crews of even average proficiency could now attain levels of precision that had previously been the exclusive domain of exceptionally skilled practitioners. The tangible benefits of this revised methodology manifested unequivocally in the statistical data without delay. By March 1944, the overall bombing accuracy across all 8th Air Force missions had surged to an average circular error probable (CP) of 1,250 feet, representing a remarkable 60% improvement compared to the figures recorded in December 1943. Crucially, and perhaps even more significantly, the percentage of bombs successfully striking within the designated target areas dramatically increased from a meager 11% to a more substantial 27%. Nevertheless, This still implied that approximately three-quarters of the deployed ordnance continued to fail in hitting their mark. Yet, despite this remaining imperfection, the improvement undeniably represented a veritable paradigm shift in operational capability, fundamentally altering the calculus of strategic bombing. Industrial facilities that had previously necessitated 4 or 5 aerial raids to inflict crippling damage upon them could now be rendered inoperable within just 2 sorties. The true supreme operational crucible for offset bombing arrived with D-Day, where the strategic stakes were immeasurably high. On June 6, 1944, the triumphant success of the entire Normandy invasion hinged critically upon the Allied bombers' capacity to decimate the formidable German coastal fortifications before ground troops made contact with the beaches. These were not mere gun positions. They constituted heavily fortified concrete bunkers, boasting walls 8 feet thick, housing powerful artillery pieces capable of decimating Allied landing craft from distances of up to 3 miles offshore. Intelligence had meticulously identified 49 major battery positions distributed along a critical 50-mile stretch of coastline. It was unequivocally understood that every single one of these emplacements had to be effectively silenced, or an incalculable number of Allied soldiers would perish in the treacherous surf. The formidable 8th Air Force was assigned the critical mission targeting the defensive emplacements at Utah and Omaha beaches. Their operational window was incredibly tight, spanning from 5:50 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., a mere 40 minutes in which to deliver in excess of 2,900 tons of bombs upon densely packed defensive emplacements spanning a total area of less than 2 square miles. The operational timing presented severe challenges, as aircrews would be executing their bombing runs during the dim light of dawn, compounded by meteorological projections indicating an extensive cloud layer between 3,000 and 6,000 feet, while conventional tactical doctrine unequivocally stated the impossibility of achieving accurate bombing through cloud cover. It was clear that this established doctrine was poised for yet another radical revision. The innovative fusion of offset bombing techniques with nascent radar navigation aids rendered it conceptually feasible to engage objectives that remained entirely obscured from visual observation. The operational strategy was meticulously designed as follows: specialized Pathfinder aircraft, outfitted with the advanced H-2X radar system, would spearhead each aerial formation. This particular radar possessed the unique capability to generate a rudimentary, yet discernible, topographical representation of the coastline, even through dense cloud layers, primarily by discerning the distinct interface separating terrestrial and aquatic environments. Upon receiving these radar images, navigators would meticulously discern prominent coastal topographical features, such as river mouths, distinct peninsulas, or characteristic shoreline curves, and then utilize these as their primary offset reference points. The underlying mathematical principles for calculating the bomb release point remained identical to visual offset bombing, with the crucial distinction being that operations now involved interpreting radar echoes rather than relying on direct visual observation. Bombardiers would then diligently monitor the designated radar reference point, meticulously compute the wind-induced drift trajectory that would guide the ordnance from that point to the German fortifications, and subsequently initiate the bomb release sequence. The operational execution on D-Day morning proved profoundly chaotic. The cloud cover was significantly more severe than initially projected, forming a pervasive, unbroken overcast layer from 2,000 feet up to 10,000 feet in numerous sectors. Consequently, bomber formations were compelled to descend to 12,000 feet in an attempt to penetrate beneath the most impenetrable meteorological conditions, thereby exposing them to the lethal reach of any German anti-aircraft artillery emplacements that had endured the preceding naval bombardment. Wind conditions were also exceptionally challenging. Powerful 25 to 40 miles per hour crosswinds, originating from the northwest, were exerting a forceful push on the aircraft, directing them towards the beaches. Paradoxically, that very wind, which initially seemed a hindrance, transformed into a strategic asset. At Omaha Beach, the initial bombing results were initially assessed as catastrophic failures. The majority of the ordnance fell short, impacting inland and gouging craters into fields and roads situated behind the German defensive lines, causing immediate concern about potential friendly fire incidents for the troops about to land. Subsequent post-invasion analysis indicated that only 31% of the formidable fortifications at Omaha sustained direct impacts during the aerial attack. However, the preliminary assessments overlooked a crucial distinction. The offset approaches executed by bombers targeting Utah Beach proved to be catastrophically effective, demonstrating the true potential of the new methodology. The very crosswinds that pushed bombs inland at Omaha, while seemingly a failure, were actually preventing bombs from hitting the beaches where Allied troops would soon be, inadvertently making the German hinterland the target. The meticulously planned bombing strategies for Utah Beach proved to be exceptionally destructive. At Utah, the skilled bombardiers executed their mission by employing a precise 45-degree offset angle, commencing their approach from the northeast. This calculated trajectory strategically allowed the prevailing crosswinds to propel their ordnance directly towards the intended beach targets. The bombs descended with remarkable accuracy, creating distinct linear patterns of destruction that effectively obliterated fortified battery positions, caused bunkers to collapse, and neutralized enemy gun emplacements with an astonishing 89% effectiveness rate. Indeed, out of the 28 primary defensive fortifications identified at Utah Beach, a remarkable 25 were rendered inoperable even before the first wave of troops made landfall. The stark disparity in outcomes between the operations at Omaha and Utah Beaches fundamentally boiled down to the execution of bombing protocols. At Omaha, bombardiers introduced an intentional delay into their bomb release sequence. This modification was born out of an intense apprehension of inadvertently striking their own Allied landing craft, prompting them to hold their bombs for an additional few crucial seconds. Regrettably, this cautious adjustment resulted in the ordnance impacting some 200 to 300 yards further inland than intended. While the underlying intention was undeniably noble, the ultimate consequence proved catastrophic for the advancing ground forces. In stark contrast, the bombardiers assigned to Utah Beach steadfastly adhered to their pre-calculated release points, foregoing any safety-related delays. Their unwavering confidence was placed in the meticulous mathematical computations designed to ensure the bombs would clear the beaches. This trust was abundantly vindicated. When elements of the 4th Infantry Division stormed Utah Beach at precisely 6:30 a.m., they encountered German defensive positions that had already been systematically dismantled. Consequently, enemy resistance was minimal, and the Allied forces sustained remarkably few casualties. The profound lessons gleaned from these differing operations were meticulously documented in a classified analysis finalized in July 1944. This report highlighted that conventional straight and bombing approaches, even those modified at Omaha with safety concerns in mind, achieved a mere 31% effectiveness. Conversely, the offset approaches employed at Utah, executed precisely as trained, demonstrated an impressive 89% effectiveness. This was far from a marginal improvement. It represented a fundamental divergence between a tactical methodology that barely functioned and one that decisively secured battlefield victories. The comprehensive report conclusively determined that the implementation of offset bombing techniques had drastically reduced the number of aerial raids necessary to neutralize fortified enemy positions, achieving this objective by a factor of 3. By the summer of 1944, this highly effective offset methodology had been universally adopted as primary doctrine across virtually every significant Allied bombing operation. Illustrative examples of its widespread application included the targeted raids on French rail yards preceding the invasion, the sustained attacks against German V-1 launch sites, and the systematic campaign aimed at crippling German oil production, all of which consistently utilized offset approaches as their standard operational procedure. The innovative technique's influence even extended beyond conventional service boundaries. The Ninth Air Force, for instance, swiftly integrated it into their medium bomber operations for tactical strikes. Even the venerable RAF Bomber Command, which had previously dismissed the concept of American precision bombing as an unrealistic fantasy, began to seriously experiment with offset methods for their own daylight operations, acknowledging its proven efficacy. This ingenious solution, born out of desperate necessity over Schweinfurt in 1943, did not simply fade with the cessation of World War II hostilities. Instead, it fundamentally reshaped human conceptualizations of delivering ordnance from aerial platforms. When the war concluded and diligent analysts commenced the monumental task of compiling the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, they uncovered truly remarkable insights within the accumulated data. Specifically, between January and December of 1944, a period during which offset bombing became standard practice throughout the 8th Air Force, the total tonnage of bombs dropped on Germany witnessed an astonishing increase of 340%. Concurrently, the precision of these strikes improved by an impressive 190%. This data unequivocally demonstrated an unparalleled capability to deliver a greater volume of ordnance, while simultaneously hitting a significantly higher proportion of intended targets. This synergistic combination of increased firepower and enhanced accuracy proved instrumental in dismantling German industrial production capabilities in ways that the indiscriminate bombing strategies of the early war years could never achieve. As the geopolitical landscape shifted into the Cold War era, offset techniques evolved from a mere tactical necessity into a sophisticated strategic science. When the United States Air Force initiated planning for potential nuclear strikes in the 1950s, the imperative for accuracy transcended operational efficiency. It became an existential requirement. A conventional bomb missing its target by a mile might merely represent a wasteful expenditure of resources. However, a nuclear weapon missing by the same margin could tragically devastate an unintended city, potentially triggering catastrophic global repercussions. Consequently, Air Force bombing schools began to instill offset geometry as a fundamental doctrine, elevating its importance to parity with essential flight skills such as taking off and landing. Every bomber pilot within the Strategic Air Command was rigorously trained to calculate offset angles with instinctive proficiency, a skill so deeply ingrained they could perform it effortlessly. This intensive training was predicated on the understanding that they would be tasked with delivering atomic weapons through heavily fortified Soviet air defenses, where any attempt at a straight-in approach would invariably result in their demise. The underlying mathematical principles continued to evolve in tandem with technological advancements. When the iconic B-52 Stratofortress entered service in 1955, it was equipped with sophisticated radar bombing systems that essentially functioned as automated offset calculators. The advanced ASQ-38 bombing navigation system possessed the capability to identify distinct radar reference points, accurately compute wind drift, determine the optimal offset angles for bomb release, and even automatically fly the approach trajectory. While the bombardier's role transitioned from arduous manual calculation to adept system supervision, the foundational principle remained rooted in Robert Williams's accidental yet profound discovery, harnessing crosswind drift as an advantageous force rather than struggling against it. The Vietnam War provided an entirely distinct operational theater that further validated the effectiveness of offset bombing. The monsoon winds prevalent over North Vietnam were notoriously fierce and unpredictable, creating meteorological conditions far more challenging than anything encountered over wartime Germany. Formations of B-52s, engaged in bombing missions along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, would meticulously approach their targets using offset angles derived from real-time wind measurements meticulously gathered by specialized weather reconnaissance aircraft. Despite dropping bombs from altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet through winds that occasionally surpassed 150 miles per hour, they consistently achieved levels of accuracy that rendered their trail interdiction efforts highly effective. Post-strike reconnaissance reports indicated that Arc Light missions, the operational codename for these B-52 raids, maintained an average circular error probable (CP) of under 1,500 feet, an extraordinary achievement given the incredibly demanding environmental conditions. These formidable challenges ultimately spurred the development of novel solutions. Subsequently, the introduction of precision-guided munitions, PGMs, appeared to render offset bombing entirely obsolete. The logical question arose: why engage in complex calculations of wind triangles when one could simply deploy a laser-guided bomb capable of correcting its own flight path? The First Gulf War in 1991 dramatically showcased the capabilities of these advanced weapons, with some famously demonstrated to be able to fly through ventilation shafts. Military analysts, deeply impressed, confidently declared that the era of calculated bombing was unequivocally over, firmly believing that sophisticated computers and GPS technology would now manage all aspects of aerial targeting. However, these analysts were ultimately mistaken in their pronouncements, having overlooked the critical and evolving domain of electronic warfare. Modern air defense systems do not merely engage attacking aircraft with conventional weaponry. They are also designed to actively jam GPS signals, spoof sophisticated targeting systems, and create complex electronic environments where even the most advanced precision weapons can be rendered unguided once again. When GPS capabilities are compromised by jamming, military operations are abruptly thrust back to the fundamental problem encountered in 1943. How does one accurately strike a target when the sophisticated technology relied upon ceases to function? The pragmatic answer that the modern Air Force has judiciously rediscovered is, once again, offset bombing. Current doctrine for operations in GPS-denied environments explicitly instructs bomber crews to utilize radar-identifiable geographical features as reliable offset reference points. They are trained to meticulously calculate wind drift manually, and to deliver their weapons employing geometric principles rather than relying on satellite-based guidance. Even the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, widely regarded as the most sophisticated aircraft ever constructed, incorporates offset bombing calculations directly into its mission planning software. This is not merely envisioned as a contingency backup but serves as a primary operational option for specific scenarios. When tasked with penetrating heavily defended airspace, where the use of active targeting systems would inevitably compromise the aircraft's stealth capabilities, passive offset techniques enable effective attacks without emitting any detectable signals. Crews identify discrete reference points using highly advanced synthetic aperture radar, precisely calculate the offset angle that leverages wind drift to their advantage, release their ordnance, and then withdraw. The adversary remains entirely unaware of their presence until the bombs begin their destructive detonations. The principles of offset targeting have even found application in the realm of modern drone warfare. Operators of remotely piloted aircraft, such as the Reaper and Predator, when contending with powerful high-altitude winds, will sometimes employ offset aiming points for their Hellfire missile attacks. While the missile's internal guidance system manages the final, terminal approach to the target, the initial firing solution intelligently employs offset geometry to place the weapon within the optimal strike envelope. This method proves to be both faster and more fuel-efficient than requiring the missile's guidance system to expend energy fighting against strong crosswinds throughout its entire flight path. Thus, the technique has completed a full conceptual circle, returning to its origins where desperate circumstances inevitably fostered profound innovation. Contemporary military planners, meticulously preparing for potential conflicts with peer adversaries, now operate under the explicit assumption that GPS capabilities will be either jammed or entirely unavailable. Consequently, there is an intense and renewed focus on training bomber crews in manual offset bombing, a level of intensity not witnessed since the critical year of 1944. Flight schools are once again diligently teaching the complexities of wind triangles, and bombing ranges are actively conducting extensive practices specifically designed around offset approach methodologies. It appears that someone within the Pentagon has diligently reviewed the invaluable after-action reports from D-Day, recognizing that established, time-tested methods retain their efficacy when newer, more advanced technologies falter. Robert Williams and Charles Murphy, the individuals whose initial navigation error inadvertently led to this profound discovery, likely never conceived that their unforeseen deviation would continue to influence the very nature of warfare 80 years later. Yet, this exemplifies the essence of true innovation. It provides such an elegant and effective solution to an immediate problem that it ultimately transcends its origins and becomes a permanent fixture. The ingenious act of dropping bombs sideways and allowing the natural forces of wind to perform the work was not merely a clever tactical trick of World War II. It represented a fundamental insight into the intricate interplay of physics, geometry, and the strategic potential of transforming environmental conditions into potent weaponry. Every precision strike conducted anywhere in the world today, irrespective of whether it is guided by GPS or meticulously calculated manually, owes a profound debt to that initially confused October morning over Schweinfurt, when an aircrew aimed at the wrong target but, by sheer accident, achieved a perfectly devastating hit on the right one.